What's going on, Dolphins? It is your boy Dillon, and it's been a few days, obviously, since I made my last video. There hasn't been a ton of new news, obviously. It's pretty much just recycling of the same, speculations and stuff, which is kind of what we're going to get into today. But there are some different scenarios for some of the same stuff, right? So we're going to talk about some different possible trade scenarios involving, the teams that are in the top 5, and things that could potentially shake up the draft, etc. So we're going to get into that. And yeah, so let's just do it. So there's this article that I found, because I right now, considering the time, obviously it's been, kind of slow the past few weeks, and obviously, I've also been quite busy as usual, a little bit more so because for those who have been following, this election cycle, I follow politics very closely. I'm very much, involved and informed and into it, whatever. So that's also taken up some considerable time. And since there's not much to report on, haven't made too many videos, but I wanted to definitely make one. And this is a good time to do it because I found this article that gives a little bit more perspective onto different scenarios that could end up playing out that could have substantial effects on the Dolphins. So the article, 2020 NFL Draft, one realistic trade every team with a top 5 pick should consider. Now, this is scenarios in which the teams in the top 5 should consider trading down. So this does actually have a scenario in which the Dolphins trade down, a scenario I would actually be very much in favor of, one that I just don't see them doing. But let's go ahead and get into it. So, the NFL is such a quarterback-driven league that teams will give up several lottery tickets for an opportunity to land the ideal signal caller for their head coach's system. These decisions can lead to early successes or immediate setbacks pending the player's performance, but it's worth the attempts. So real quick, a couple things. As you guys know, I completely disagree with the philosophy that permeates through the NFL, that everything is the quarterback. It's a team sport. There are 11 guys on the field. I would never take a quarterback in round 1 or 2 ever. I would never chase a quarterback. I would take one in round 3 or later every year, depending on how much you actually need it, etc., etc. There's all of the evidence to show that first-round quarterbacks are far more likely to be busts or just average than superstars. It's not actually worth it if you're trying to be efficient, pragmatic, if you're trying to be, logical and reasonable. If you're trying to be any of those things, it really doesn't make sense to chase quarterbacks the way that they do in the NFL, but it is the way that things are. So, something that I try and push back on, and hopefully the narrative will eventually change, but it is the way it is. And also, let's note that, well, again, from my perspective, and really, if you just look at the data that we have available, and we'll actually get a lot more data once free agency starts, which is any moment now, essentially, if I'm not mistaken, it should be within the next few days or going into this next week. It's about to pop up. I can't remember the exact date on when it starts, but it is right around the corner. And when the Dolphins start making their signings, it will determine what their path is going to be a little bit more. Now, I think that they're going to end up trying to do something like take a couple big name free agents, like Jack Conklin, right? Somebody, people, or, either free agents, or they'll do some sort of trade maybe to get offensive linemen, veteran offensive linemen. I don't think that's necessarily bad, but when it comes to free agency, I don't want to break the bank, right? When it comes to the free agent or a trade, it would be with big name free agents or big name players that are going to come with high price tags. So my guess is that they're going to pick up a couple offensive linemen, big names, but that come with big price tags. They're going to blow through a chunk of the cap space that we have. In doing that, they're also likely to pick up a veteran defensive lineman in free agency. This is my guess, right, on what I think they're going to do. And they're going to think that those key additions are going to be where the most improvement comes. Maybe they pick up a high priced edge rusher as well, and they're gonna neglect those spots in the draft, those areas in the draft. They'll trade up to get a quarterback. I think it's more likely that they trade up, not down, although there is a scenario in here in which they do trade down, and then they get a quarterback that way. I think that altogether is a recipe for disaster. We'll see if that's what they end up doing, and then if that's what they end up doing, we'll see how it pans out. But let's continue here. In 2018, the New York Jets moved from 6th to 3rd with quarterbacks Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, Josh Rosen, Josh Allen, and Lamar Jackson all expected to be picked early in the draft. Let's pause just really fast and take a look at those quarterbacks. Baker Mayfield went in the first round. In fact, I think, if I'm not mistaken, he was the first overall pick to the Browns. How well has that worked out? Now he's a good quarterback, and I think but as his career is playing out, especially in the situation that he was put in on the dismal Browns, who have yet to prove that they can achieve success, let alone maintain it, after instituting a philosophy of tanking, which the Dolphins 100% did. They were lucky not to have an 0-16 season or a 1-15 season, and there were significant factors that played into that, but it was not really from the coaching staff or the front office perspective. They did everything they could to sabotage the season, and they in fact installed a tanking philosophy. And so, the Browns haven't made it yet, and the Dolphins are somehow, anyway, but Baker Mayfield not doing so hot. Sam Darnold, well, he's struggling with the Jets. I don't know. From what I've heard, Adam Gase is not the biggest fan of Sam Darnold, although he did settle him down last year, got them to more wins than were expected, and got good performances out of him towards the back end of the season. I don't know that they're going to be getting a quarterback this year, so it's likely they will continue. Hopefully he can improve, but he hasn't done particularly great. Josh Rosen, he's been a failure to this point, overwhelmingly. A lot of it is not his fault because of the situations that he was put in Arizona and now with the Dolphins, but I still think he could be a good quarterback in the league. But a lot of these guys are just going to be maybe, average at best, even when they, maybe do get a foothold somewhere in the league. But so far, these first round quarterbacks are not impressing really anybody with their records to this point. Josh Allen, okay, he's the best one on the list so far, and Lamar Jackson obviously is by far the best, but people felt like he wasn't a safe enough pick to be taken early in the draft, right? Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield, Josh Rosen, and Josh Allen all got picked in the top 15, whereas Lamar Jackson didn't get picked until the 32nd pick in round 1 after the Ravens moved up to get him. So just goes to show you how uncertain it is in the first round, and that's just from those quarterbacks. That doesn't even include the fucking hundreds and thousands of other quarterbacks over the years that have been taken in the first round who have only been average at best, or backups, or busts, or what have you. And you have at least as many or just as good a chance of picking up, great or franchise quarterbacks in later rounds. And again, the GOAT, Tom Brady, was a 5th round pick. So it's absolutely absurd. Anyway, so it just goes to show you that it's not worth taking a quarterback in rounds 1 or 2. It's not worth it. The strategy should not be chase the one position that everybody puts all of this fucking hype and pressure on, etc., which makes it worse then for these young quarterbacks when they come in, because then they have all of this pressure that they have to live up to, and then when they don't, then it creates self-esteem issues, or it creates confidence issues. They kind of fall off. Maybe they don't perform as well, and then their careers get derailed. None of it makes sense at all. But okay. Anyway, let's continue on. 2 years prior, the Los Angeles Rams and Philadelphia Eagles moved up to the number 1 and number 2 spots for Jared Goff and Carson Wentz. How are their careers going? Not the best. Okay, I mean, they're all right. They're good quarterbacks. right? But are they, world beaters? Are they franchise guys? Maybe they are currently the franchise guy, but have they, stunned the league and taken, Carson Wentz keeps getting fucking hurt. The Rams have been struggling in a lot of ways. Now, it's not all on Jared Goff, right? But, just the evidence is overwhelming that the philosophy of chase quarterbacks in the first round is stupid. That you have to just get... That the solution to your team's issues is get the signal caller of the supposed future for your franchise. That doesn't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. The amount of times that it works is exceptionally small. And even in the case of somebody like, let's say, Patrick Mahomes, he was picked in the first round and he is without question a special talent and a success. But that is an outlier that proves, right? It's the exception that proves the rule. And he got picked up and then sat a year behind Alex Smith. Right? So most of these quarterbacks, not only do they get put into all this pressure from being picked in the first round and all the quarterback hype, et cetera, but then they have to adjust into the NFL and oftentimes get just fucking thrown right into the fire, which ends up being even more of a disaster. Which teams could be the movers and shakers before or during the 2020 draft? Where could presumptive number 1 overall pick Joe Burrow land? Let's go through possible trade proposals for the top 5 teams in the draft. Within these offers, we'll refer to 2020 Hall of Fame inductee and former Dallas Cowboys head coach Jimmy Johnson's trade chart, which is viewed as outdated in some circles but provides a basis for pick value. Number 1, Cincinnati Bengals. The Cincinnati Bengals received the number 7th overall pick, the 38th overall pick, a fourth rounder, the 103 overall pick, and a 2021 first rounder and a 5th rounder. And the Carolina Panthers receive the number 1 overall pick, a 5th rounder, number 129, and a 6th rounder, number 161. Okay, now it's a lot of draft picks, a lot of capital moving all around, blah, blah, blah. I think that it is actually more likely, though, that the Dolphins, especially considering the fact that they have the draft capital to do it, would be able to pull off a trade that the Cincinnati Bengals would be okay with, right? Because in this scenario, they get the number 7th overall pick in the first round, the 38th overall pick, which is in the second, a 4th rounder, 103, and then a 2020 first rounder and a 5th rounder. But from the Dolphins, they could get 3 first round picks, including at least 2, if not all 3 of our first round picks from this year, if they wanted to pressure the Dolphins into doing so. And if the Dolphins, look, again, Stephen Ross is craven. He's desperate at this point. He didn't like the Minkah Fitzpatrick trade. He wanted a quarterback. This whole past year was about a quarterback, and everything that we've done, everything leading up till now is about it. He's getting older. It's not getting any better. And in the past, he's proven that he thinks that the only way, or that the way to solve the problems with this team, is to just throw resources at it. So money and draft capital. It is certainly within the realm of possibility that the Dolphins would be the ones to trade up to the number 1 spot and trade away substantial amounts of capital to do so. Especially when you consider that there will be other players that will drive up the price, and then could therefore cause the Dolphins to end up having, could end up giving away all 3 first round picks, their 5th, their 18th, and their 26th this year, just to move up 4 spots to get the quarterback that Stephen Ross loves, whoever that may be. Right? So that's why this is relevant. I personally don't think that this is that this particular trade between the Bengals and the Panthers has a high probability of bearing out, but it could, right? There's a ton of factors that go into it, which they'll explain a little bit more when we get through, but even the existence of this possibility, and it is, and even more so since it's been put out into the world, into the internet, into the universe. I'm talking about it, right? It increases the probability. Does that mean that it's going to happen? No. And the probability still could be like 5%. I don't know what it is, but it could be small, but it still could happen, and it still could be something that ends up playing a factor in driving up the price. All right, so let's look at this trade. Joe Burrow has said he won't refuse to play for the Cincinnati Bengals, but it's still early in the draft process. Secondly, as ESPN's Adam Schefter pointed out on Get Up, clubs may offer intriguing packages for a shot at the 2019 Heisman Trophy winner. Now, just real quick pause there and going to what I was saying before, right? So this would be an intriguing trade option for the Bengals if that was going to happen, right? To get the 7th overall, the 38th overall, the 103 overall, right? In the 1st, 2nd, and 4th rounds respectively in this year's draft, and also a 2021 first rounder and a 5th rounder. But if they could coax the 5th, 18th, and 26th out of the Dolphins from this year, that actually seems to me to be a lot more intriguing. Okay, and something like this could push them in that direction. Anyway, let's see. Schefter mentioned the Carolina Panthers as a possible team of interest because of the connection between Burrow and their offensive coordinator, Joe Brady, right? And so things like this increase the probability. So the 5% I gave before, maybe it's actually a 20% probability, but that's pretty substantial. I don't know. My brain is not a computer that's capable of processing the thousands of different scenarios that are possible. But I would suggest, especially since it's clearly a scenario that's being put into the conversation, that increases its probability, along with things like Joe Burrow and the offensive coordinator of the Panthers having a connection, right? That increases probability. In 2019, Brady served as the passing game coordinator and wide receivers coach at LSU, helping Burrow to a breakout year in which he threw for 5,671 yards and 60 touchdowns with 6 interceptions. Wow, it's a 10-to-1 ratio. But part of the reason why he's, being talked about the way he is. And possibly part of the reason why Stephen Ross loves him. Though the Panthers plan to move forward with Cam Newton, he's still months away from being game ready, and circumstances can change per NFL Network's Ian Rappaport. Also, the 30-year-old signal caller has only 1 year left on his contract. If the Panthers land the number 1 overall pick, they would have the option of playing Burrow or Newton pending the latter's recovery. Or they could sit him for a year behind Cam Newton in a Patrick Mahomes style situation, right? While they play out the last year of Cam's contract, and then just let him be a free agent. And it's done. They don't have to worry about eating any kind of money or anything like that. They're not going to extend him. They got their quarterback of the future who had an opportunity to adjust into the NFL without having to get thrown into the fire immediately. Gets to learn the playbook and is gain chemistry with his teammates and his coaches, etc., etc., etc. And he's already got a really good rapport with the offensive coordinator, right? So a lot of these things could be factors going forward. Why would the Bengals say yes to this proposal? Perhaps the front office isn't sure if Burrow is sold on being the chosen one in Cincinnati. This club hasn't won a playoff game since the 1990 term and had a tenuous divorce with its last number 1 overall pick, quarterback Carson Palmer, who forced his way out via a trade demand and retirement threat. Palmer's brother Jordan is preparing Burrow for the NFL. With the number 7th overall pick, the front office could still land a top signal caller such as Tua Tagovailoa, or maybe Team Brass sees upside in Jordan Love, who generated major buzz at the NFL scouting combine per Rappaport. Let's pause right there for a second. I seriously doubt that Tua is going to drop, especially with how glowing his medical records or his medical reports have been past or to number 7. That's part of the reason why I think the 5th, 18th, and 26th overall picks would be a more appealing option for them, because I still don't think Tua would even make it to the number 5th overall pick. I still think there's a substantial chance he'll get picked before them, but he could potentially land at the number 5th overall pick if the Dolphins moved up and, let's say, just decided to take Joe Burrow. But maybe the Dolphins take Tua there, but then that could give the Bengals an opportunity to either get Burrow, which is unlikely at 5th, but Burrow or Herbert or Love or any of those guys, and then still have the 18th and 26th overall picks to fill out their roster around whoever their quarterback is, right? The Bengals can accept additional first and second round selections and then use those picks to accumulate blue chip prospects for their rebuild. Pause right there. Second, let's see. additional first and second round selections, and then use those picks. Okay, so those are theoretically the best players in the draft in first and second rounds, but in the scenario that this person gives for the Bengals and the Panthers, they would get a first round pick, the 7th overall pick, a second round pick, the 38th overall, and then that's it. They'd have those two. In a situation, and then several other picks, a first round from next year, whatever, a 5th round from next year, and a 4th round from this year. Or they can maybe just get the 3 first round picks that the Dolphins have from this year. So, and that's part of the reason why I say the Dolphins have, despite the fact that they've convinced a ton of people that they didn't tank this past season because they won 5 games, despite the fact that they implemented the key points, the key fundamental points of tanking. Get rid of all your veteran leadership talent, experience, etc., etc., etc. Clear the books, get cap space, and accumulate a bunch of draft capital. They did all those things. Those are the hallmarks of tanking, but they convinced people because they won 5 games that that's not what they were doing, but they're trying to have their cake and eat it too, right? They let Ryan Fitzpatrick stay in the game and give them that chance to be that leader and to uplift the guys, et cetera, and help them win some games, despite the obvious efforts from both the coaching staff and the front office to lose as much as possible. But they allowed that so they could get a few games, so they could have the guys and appearance that they weren't tanking, and then, but with all this draft capital, still then go, trade up to get, whoever it is that they want, even though they didn't get the first overall pick, right? It's having their cake and eat it and trying to eat it too. But my guess is that it's going to backfire. The Bengals can accept additional first and second. I already read that. And Cincinnati can still land a potential franchise signal caller. Carolina would receive 3,070 trade value points this year compared to 21,008 for Cincinnati. But the addition of the 2020 first round and 5th rounders balance the transaction. The scale would even tip in the Bengals' favor if the Panthers have a top 16 pick next year. And so, look, I mean, that's why it's perfectly feasible that the Dolphins could do something like what I outlined. And I gave a couple scenarios in previous videos of the amount of draft capital. Now, to be fair, that was minus compensatory picks, which we still haven't gotten word of. I haven't seen any news on that yet, so stand by for that when it comes out. But that was minus compensatory picks, and it was only including picks from this year, not future picks from like the 2021 draft. But they would have to give away substantial amounts of capital. Anyway, number 2, Washington Redskins. Redskins received the number 9th overall pick, the 9th and 20 overall picks, and defensive end Yannick Ngakoue. Jacksonville would receive the number 2 overall pick and a 4th rounder, number 98 overall. The Washington Redskins could choose door number 1, likely edge rusher Chase Young, after Joe Burrow comes off the board first. Behind door number 2, the Redskins could pick Tua Tagovailoa, a scenario that's gained traction per NFL Network's Michael Silver. All of this stuff, right? Even those small scenarios within this greater scenario that he's playing out, right? Those other scenarios that could play out. They take Chase Young after Burrow gets picked number 1, or, maybe they take Tua at number 2. All of those scenarios could affect how the Dolphins make their decision, who they end up taking, and whether or not they end up trading up. But all of these scenarios, every single scenario that I've thought of, that I've come across, increases the probability that the Dolphins are going to trade up. Here's a third option that may catch the attention of head coach Ron Rivera and company: 2 first-round picks and a Pro Bowl defensive end. Instead of a near slam-dunk prospect in Young, Washington can land someone who's proved himself through 4 seasons with 37.5 sacks and acquire a pair of top 20 prospects. Now, pause right there. So that's overall a pretty solid trade. I mean, you do get, you drop from the number 2 spot, and you get the number 9th, which is not too far down, and the number 20th. So it's still 2 first-round selections. Instead of getting your pass rusher and Chase Young, you get him in Yannick Ngakoue. But part of the other side of that is Yannick Ngakoue, while he has proven to be a factor in this league, he's also in his mid-20s, and he's going to be hitting the back end of his career in the next few years, right? So Chase Young, while he has yet to prove himself in the NFL, he's also got a much longer career at this point going forward, right? Whereas Yannick Ngakoue may have maybe another 5, 6, 7 years, Chase Young theoretically has another 10 years from this moment in time, right? So there's a lot that goes into these decisions. The Redskins plan to keep edge rusher Ryan Kerrigan, but he has only 1 year left on his deal. Of course, Washington would have to pay Yannick Ngakoue, that's another aspect of that, who said he has no interest in signing a long-term pact with the Jacksonville Jaguars. To avoid a messy divorce, the Jaguars could franchise tag and trade Ngakoue to the Redskins in this blockbuster deal for the number 2 and 98 picks. The Jaguars don't have a clear-cut starter at quarterback. Last offseason, Jacksonville signed Nick Foles to a 4-year, $88 million deal, but the coaching staff benched him for 2019 sixth-rounder Gardner Minshew late in the season after he was an injury fill-in in weeks 2 through 9. To clean up the misstep on last year's investment in Foles, the Jaguars can select Tua Tagovailoa, have him sit 1 year behind the two competitors for the starting spot, and then let him take over in 2021. At that point, Jacksonville can part with Foles and incur a more manageable $12.5 million dead cap hit as opposed to one for $33.9 million this year per spot track. Okay, now that's in that scenario, then that takes Tua off the board for the Dolphins. But Stephen Ross is not going to let Joe Burrow go number 1 and Tua go number 2 in this kind of a scenario. It's not going to happen. But these scenarios exist, and there is substantial possibility, not probability, right? It's not a guaranteed thing that it's going to happen, but there is a substantial possibility that these could happen. And especially since they're out in the mainstream, they can find their ways into the Dolphins locker room, or not locker room, into the front office, into the ears of the people who make decisions, and increase the pressure and likelihood that the Dolphins trade up, potentially even all the way to the number 1 pick to ensure that they get whoever the quarterback is. Maybe it's not even Tua or Joe Burrow. I can't imagine they would go with somebody like Herbert or Love over those guys, considering everything that we've heard and seen to this point. But, maybe they just want to ensure they get their guy, and so they do it. It's possible. In terms of trade points, the Jaguars would win the deal 2708 to 2200, but Ngakoue, a top pass rusher, balances the scales. Number 3, Detroit Lions. The Lions received the number 6 and 37th overall picks and offensive guard Forrest Lamp. The Chargers received the number 3 pick. In a text to Dave Burkett of the Detroit Free Press, Detroit Lions general manager Bob Quinn called the Matthew Stafford trade rumors 100% false. It wouldn't make sense for a staff that's under pressure to deliver results. If the Lions select a quarterback for the future, how does that decision help Quinn and head coach Matt Patricia for the 2020 season? The Lions need players who can start week 1 or produce at high levels as rookies. Quinn can move down a few slots and pick up a second rounder along with offensive guard Forrest Lamp, a 2017 second rounder to replace impending free agent Graham Glasgow. Detroit would plug a hole and acquire 2 picks to draft players who could take the field with the first stringers in the 2020 season opener. I think that now my prediction is the Detroit Lions will trade back, but it will be with the Dolphins from 3 to 5. We'll have to see how that plays out. But most of what, I agree so far, pretty much with I agree pretty much with all of this. I do think that the Lions would, but there is potential though, because that could be smokescreen with Matthew Stafford, and Matt Patricia, in his time since leaving New England, hasn't done particularly well with the Lions. They are in pressure mode after the season. If they don't perform well, I would venture to guess that Matt Patricia is going to be on the hot seat. So getting this year right for them is, or at least taking substantial steps forward, is a big deal for them. So there's a lot of options available to them, and they are also under pressure. So, that could also massively influence things. The Lions may have their sights set on cornerback Jeff Okudah at number 3, but defensive tackle Derek Brown could be available at number 6. He'd fill a major need in the middle of the line after the team released Damon Harrison. Bear in mind, A'Shawn Robinson is headed toward the free agent market. According to NFL Network's Ian Rappaport, the Los Angeles Chargers agreed to acquire guard Trey Turner for tackle Russell Okung on Wednesday. In 2019, Dan Feeney took the snaps at left guard. Assuming he continues to do so, Lamp seems like an expendable asset. The oft-injured lineman is suited up for just 9 games in 3 seasons. He missed 2017. The Chargers can land one of the top 4 quarterbacks with the number 3 overall pick, Tua Tagovailoa, Justin Herbert, or Jordan Love. Los Angeles will consider Tyrod Taylor for the starting position, but one of the incoming prospects could add juice to the franchise as the team moves to SoFi Stadium in Inglewood, California. Tagovailoa throws an accurate ball, 69.3% completion rate at Alabama, and possesses the mobility that fits the evolution of the position to more athletic passers under center, provided injuries don't continue to be a major issue for him, which the trends would suggest that they will, especially considering the injuries that he's had. 2 ankles and a massive hip injury. Herbert has a big arm and could utilize wide receivers Keenan Allen and Mike Williams on the perimeter. Love has great upside because of his athleticism and strong arm and would be capable of providing a spark to the offense. The trade points match up in this deal, 2,200, 2,130 in favor of the Chargers, but Lamp could help the Lions save money by not having to chase a guard on the open market. 4. The New York Giants. Giants received the 14th and 45 overall picks and cornerback MJ Stewart. The Bucks received the number 4th overall pick, a sixth rounder, number 164, and safety Antoine Bethea. General Manager Dave Gettleman isn't a big trader on draft day, but will he fall for anyone at number 4 if Chase Young and Jeff Okudah come off the board at numbers 2 and 3? Sure, Gettleman can take offensive tackle Jedrick Wills Jr., but that's a strong position within this year's class. Isaiah Simmons sounds intriguing, but how will the Swiss Army knife defender translate to the NFL? Such uncertainty may cause Big Blue to pause. The Giants can move back to number 14th, add a second rounder, pick up a potential upgrade at the slot cornerback position, and dump 35-year-old safety Antoine Bethea's expiring deal. He could become a leader for a young secondary and reunite with Bruce Arians, who was his head coach during the 2017 campaign. Midway through the first round, Big Blue can still add a playmaker for its defense, maybe linebacker Kenneth Murray or safety Grant Delpit. Gettleman could also add a hog molly to the offensive line. According to ESPN's Jenna Lane, the Tampa Bay Bucks will explore quarterback options on the free agent market. Peter King of NBC Sports thinks it's likely the team moves on from Jameis Winston. What if the quarterback options dry up or choose to play in places other than Tampa Bay? Arians doesn't have to settle for Winston. General Manager Jason Licht should work on a blockbuster trade targeting the number 4 pick, which would give him a shot at a big arm to run an aggressive passing attack. Both Justin Herbert and Jordan Love would be logical fits because of their ability to push the ball downfield. The Buccaneers would have to give up their first 2 picks in this year's draft, but Herbert or Love could be the long-term answer at the most important position. As for defensive back MJ Stewart, he didn't fare well under the new staff during the 2019 campaign. Pause just real quick. Any of these possible scenarios that we've talked about through this article or ever could drastically affect how the Dolphins decide to do, their shit. And the vast majority of them, again, increase the probability that the Dolphins will trade up. But multiple of these scenarios could actually even play out because, in case you haven't noticed, none of the picks have been repeated. So that means multiple of these actually could end up bearing out. Maybe Joe Burrow gets taken at number 1, but then maybe the Washington Redskin trade gets done and Tua comes off the board at number 2, and then maybe the Giants also trade up to number 4 to get Justin Herbert or Jordan Love. Do people really think that Stephen Ross is going to wait and let any of those scenarios possibly play out and lose on the top 2, top 3, top 4 of the quarterbacks out there? No. He's not going to do that. He's going to... I'm actually convincing myself more and more that he's not going to trade to the number 3 spot, that he actually is going to trade up to the number 1 spot to just make sure that he gets the quarterback. Anyway, we'll see though. We'll see how it plays out. Stewart suffered a knee injury and listed as a healthy scratch this past term. He lost his role in the slot to rookie Sean Murphy-Bunting, who logged 8 pass breakups and 3 interceptions. The former could be a solid trade chip because of his 2018 second-round draft pedigree. The Buccaneers win this deal in points, 18-25 to 15-50, but the Giants receive the better player and pick up another top 50 pick, which would be a solid move for a rebuilding club with only one day 2 selection. Alright, and now the Miami Dolphins and a possible trade back, which I find to be far less probable than them trading up, but here it goes. The Dolphins would receive, and I would actually very much love this scenario, because then we would pick up the number 13th and 34th overall picks, and we would give up only the number 5th pick. So, in the first round, we would have the 13th, the 18th, and the 26th, and then we would pick up pick number 34 in the second round in addition to the 2 picks that we already have there. That would be a phenomenal trade down for the Dolphins. I find it to be exceptionally unlikely, especially with all the competition within the top 5 for quarterbacks and the desperation for Miami, and particularly the front office at the behest and direction of Stephen Ross. So, you know, we'll see how that plays out. But let's get into it. The Miami Dolphins and Indianapolis Colts have a simple scenario. The former moves down 8 spots and picks up a second rounder. The latter lands a high potential quarterback who falls out of the top 4. The Colts have been linked to quarterback Philip Rivers, which makes sense because of his familiarity with head coach Frank Reich and offensive coordinator Nick Sirianni from their shared time with the Chargers. If the 38-year-old signal caller doesn't sign with Indianapolis, general manager Chris Ballard could go after a quarterback prospect since the team isn't fully committed to Jacoby Brissett. Jordan Love, who may struggle against pro defenses because of limited exposure to top FBS competition, could benefit from sitting for a year behind Brissett. However, his pocket presence, athleticism, and ability to drop passes in a bucket 10 or more yards downfield portend great upside. Though the Colts are unsure of their starting quarterback, Ballard has a good enough roster with a strong offensive line to take a calculated risk on the high ceiling Utah State product. And that would be a smart way to, you know, go about, you know, handling your quarterback, even though, again, I still don't advocate for taking one in the first round, but in a lot of these scenarios they involve quarterbacks actually sitting behind, these young quarterbacks actually sitting behind a veteran for a year, and, you know, to his case in part to heal, but also in all their cases to adjust to the NFL, learn their playbooks, gain chemistry with their coaches and teammates, etc., etc. And that's how you should do it. Frankly, I think quarterbacks should have an opportunity to sit for a couple years. That's why I advocate for never taking one in the first or second round, but take one every year in the third or later, depending on how much you actually need one. Right? If you feel settled at starting quarterback and backup, then you have one for sure. You take one for sure every year. You know, maybe in the later rounds in 6th or 7th, that could be, you know, potential. I mean, they could be potential breakout stars, and then maybe they just fly up the depth chart, or they become developmental guys that maybe, you know, spend a little bit of time on the practice squad, or that if you have a guy that gets poached from you that you've been developing, then you're constantly bringing in new guys. It's just the better philosophy overall, and then you give those young quarterbacks time to adjust, etc., 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 blah blah blah, and it's all around better for everybody, and especially if your goal is sustained success, not just sporadic and random occasional success. Which is where the Dolphins are headed if they keep going down the path that they've started on. And especially if they do what I think that they're going to do, and think that the high-priced free agents are going to be, you know, what they need to really get us going, and a quarterback that they take high in the first round after trading up to get him, including significant draft capital. I just think it's a disaster plan. Hopefully that's not what they do. We will know very soon what they are going to do, as both free agency and the draft are right around the corner. Miami shouldn't force the issue at quarterback. I agree with that, but they're gonna. Almost all the evidence suggests that. We'll have to wait and see. The Dolphins don't have to choose an alternative option at the position because of roster need unless the front office believes in that player. And it's not the front office. The front office is going to do whatever Stephen Ross says. Stephen Ross, and he may not have even decided at this point. He may be waiting until Tua has his pro day, etc., right? But whoever it is that Stephen Ross decides on, he will tell them, I want this guy, whatever it takes to get him, and it may be within the minutes before the first pick gets taken or whatever, right? Or wherever they trade up, maybe the third pick, right? It could be minutes before the Dolphins execute the trade and pick their player. But yeah, anyway, it's what Stephen Ross wants. They're going to get the guy that he wants, whoever the quarterback is, and they'll do whatever it takes to get him. Armando Salguero of the Miami Herald reported that the team may favor Justin Herbert over Tua Tagovailoa, but it is smokescreen season. I doubt that personally. I mean, there have been reports that no team has done more homework on Herbert than the Dolphins. You know, maybe they're not so sure about his medical, situation, but all the reports have been as obscenely positive as they could be. And I say it like that because it's like over the top, right? Every single report has been just like absolutely over the top right from the get-go, right? Now they did get his injury set quickly, right? But even from the initial onset, most people refused to acknowledge that his injury was far worse than Barry Sanders, right? So I always like pause for a minute because I always want to say Deion Sanders, but anyway, so I gotta catch myself, and as you guys know, I smoke weed, so sometimes I'm always high. So anyway, so I want to make sure to get that right. But the injury was far worse. In Barry Sanders' case, the ball popped out of the socket a little bit, a subluxation, and he was able to push it back in, pop it back in, and keep going. It wasn't a full dislocation, first and foremost. It was a partial dislocation. That's what a subluxation is. And furthermore, Tagovailoa didn't just have a full dislocation of the ball from the joint, but it also broke straight through the back of the joint. Now, again, everything from Jump Street till now has been as positive as possible, but the dude has a significant injury history. He's a smaller quarterback to begin with. If he goes into an organization like the Dolphins that at this point is expected to have a bad offensive line, well, then, I mean, it's just more and more disaster. But let's continue. So I think that they should do the trade back, but I don't think it's likely. Other outlets have linked the Dolphins to Tagovailoa. ESPN's Todd McShay slotted the Alabama product to the team at number 5 in his latest mock draft. Regardless of the Dolphins' ideal quarterback option, they shouldn't settle for a player who will likely be expected to lead the franchise. General Manager Chris Greer can take a look at a second or third rounder who piques his interest, or wait until next year to select a signal caller, perhaps Trevor Lawrence or Justin Fields, should they declare as underclassmen. Now, again, I wouldn't advocate for taking a quarterback in the first or second round, even if it's next year, but I would take the trade back and then get a guy in the third round, right? Like he mentions in here, a third rounder who piques his interest. There you go. Especially with, Josh Rosen still on the roster and Jake Rudock there as well, and Ryan Fitzpatrick, at least right now, expected to come back as the veteran guy, as the lead veteran. Anyway, in year 2 of the Dolphins' rebuild, they should look to acquire more draft capital if they're lukewarm on a prospect on the clock with any of their 3 picks in the first round. The trade points almost match at 1710, 1700 in favor of Miami, a fair transaction with comparable value. So, again, I would love to see the Dolphins execute a trade down in that fashion. Do I think it's going to happen? No. I absolutely do not think it's going to happen. And I think, again, that they are going to trade up, most likely to the number 3 spot with the Detroit Lions. But as time goes on, in my head and from my perspective, the probability and possibility of it being the number 1 pick that they trade up to is even more substantial. So we'll see how it plays out. But I think that the likelihood of them trading up as opposed to down or even staying put is far greater. But again, we'll have to wait and see. Free agency will be very telling because, you know, it'll tell us where they are trying to fill holes in free agency and where they are going to not focus on as much in the draft. And then especially if they, you know, get some big name free agents on the offensive line, that would also then indicate that they are more likely to trade up in the draft. So we'll have to wait and see how that all plays out. Anyway, that's what I got for you guys. I hope you guys enjoy my videos and perspective. If you do, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you hit the bell if you want to get the alerts. Share my channel and videos with your friends and family. And of course, as always, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Dillon Tartaro. And with that, I'm out. I'll see y'all soon. Fins up.